So for this example, $280 goes into cost. 60% is our markup. Where does 100% go? Selling price, because we're on selling price. So I'm going to put, oops, not 100%. What's going to go up there? 40%. 40 plus 60 is 100. We are looking for dollar amount of the markup. So we're not going to use the selling price. 60 times 280 divided by 40 is $420 is the dollar markup. Any questions? Okay, so now for this one, the cost is $450. The markup is, gotta make sure this works. $10 on selling price. I want you to find the selling price. So what do we know and where does it go? $450 goes in the dollar cost. 10% is the percent markup. 100% goes with the selling price. So 90% goes with the cost. We're looking for selling price. We're not going to use the markup this time. 100 times 450 divided by 90 is $500. How are we doing on these? Okay? Not horrible? We'll come back to some examples of that later on. Let's discuss briefly why we would want to have a percent on cost, or why you'd want to have a percent on selling price. Well, the reasons to have a markup on cost are mostly obvious, because easy. You should always know the cost, right? You have the cost coming in, what you have to pay for it. Usually you don't get to set the cost. The supplier, the distributor you're buying from sets the cost. So you know that amount. So that's pretty simple. Why would you want to have a percent on selling price? Well, at the end of each day, what information do you have available? Do you have the cost of the stuff you sold that day readily available? No, what do you have readily available? Got the cash register is going to register the selling price. So there are reasons why you would want it each way. I mean, if I am the one that has to set the price on every object, it would be nice to know what percent of the cost I need to have in order to cover my expenses and still make a profit. So then I can use whatever the cost is coming in, I can mark it up and set the selling price on it. But on the other side of that, if I'm doing my bookkeeping at the end of every day or the end of every period, it'd be nice to be able to just pull the information out of the cash register and then be able to figure out what was the cost of that item from that selling price. So there are a lot of times in business where it is useful to be able to convert a percent markup on cost to a percent markup on selling price, or the other way around. So let's say that we have a 25% markup on cost. We're going to convert that to percent markup on selling price. So convert a 25% markup on cost to a percent markup on selling price. Now you might be looking at this thinking, well, I didn't give you a dollar amount. How do I know what that's going to be if I don't know the dollar amount of anything? The dollar amount doesn't matter. The conversion will always be the same. To start off with, let's pick a dollar amount. For here, we're starting out with 25% on cost. So let's pick a dollar amount for cost. I'm going to pick $100 because that makes life really easy for us. So I have a $100 cost, and this is a 25% markup on cost. Where's my 100 go? Cost, right? So that means this is 125 down here. So what I am going to do is I am going to find both numbers over here. Let's find my markup first. So I'll cross multiply and divide. 25 times 100 divided by 100 is $25 markup. Now I could cross multiply and divide again to find the selling price, but I'm just going to do the easy way, which is exactly 100 plus 25 is $125. I took that red line out because now I'm going to redo the left side of this. The dollar amounts can't change, but I'm asked to convert the percent from that 25% markup on cost to an equivalent percent markup on selling price. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my dollar amounts on the right side, and I'm going to redo the left side as a percent markup on selling price. So that means 100% is now going to go here, correct? And what I'm looking for is the percent markup. So what that means is, on this other side, I'm going to use the $25 as across from the percent, across from what I'm looking for. The 125 is across from the 100, so I'm going to use those numbers. So I'm going to cross multiply and divide. 100 times 25 divided by 125 gives me 20. So that 25% markup on cost is equivalent to a 20% markup on selling price. We're going to look at a few more examples of this. Convert a 60% markup on cost to a percent markup on selling price. So this is an equivalent example to what we just did. Tell me what we're going to fill in here the first time around. 60% goes markup. Where's my 100 go? 60% is on cost, so 100 goes here. Makes this 160 is my selling price. I'm going to pick a dollar amount for my cost. I'm going to pick $100. Why? Because I'm lazy. What's my markup going to be? $60. Selling price, 160. See a pattern developing there? Yeah, as long as I let my cost be $100, all of these numbers are just equal to my percents, because the percent on my cost is also 100. Everything else has to be the same going across. So now again, I'm going to ignore this piece, and I'm going to redo the left side of my table. To convert it to markup on selling price, that means 100 is now 100% now goes with the selling price. So I'm looking for this percent markup. 100 times 60 divided by 160 is 37.5%. Correct? In your notes, see if you can do this one for me. Convert a 40% markup on cost to percent markup on selling price. Sure. So we can fill in the 40% here. It's on cost, 100% goes there. Selling price is 140. What'd you guys use over here? So $100 for the cost makes this 40 and 140. So now what? 100% goes with the selling price now, and we're looking for this percent. So 100 times 40 divided by 140 is 28.5714286 approximately. So we'll go 28.57%. How many came up with 28.57? Cool.
So if you wanted to mark up everything you sell consistently at 40%,
Yep.
you'd use markup on cost.
Yes.
But if you were trying to be competitive with other businesses and you decided on price, regardless of what the cost was, you're going to use markup on
Selling price. And we'll look at some examples as to where that would fit in. And most businesses use a combination of both. Because let's say you know that you have to have 40% beyond what you pay for it to cover your expenses and a little bit of profit. So that's this situation right here. You need that 40%. But at the end of the day, you need to figure out what was your total dollar markup.
But you might not sell stuff that's way over the price.
Exactly. So what you would do, let's do it right now. So what you would do then is, let's say you know that you can sell an item for, okay, $100. Well, let's do $80. I want to make it more interesting. $80. I gotta make it a little bit difficult. So you know you can sell this item for $80. That's what your competitors are selling it for, or maybe they're selling it for a little more or a little less. But you know, in your situation, maybe you know you can't sell it for as much because you don't have as fancy of a store, so people are not willing to pay as much where you're at. Or maybe you have something like a certain attraction right next to you, so you know that people are willing to pay a little bit more where you're at. Like if you're right next to Disney World, people are willing to pay a little bit higher price at your shop because you're right next to this big attraction. Exactly. Or if you're right next to a place that's really high priced and has a reputation for being really high priced, little things like that. So anyway, you can sell this item for $80 based on your market research. You must have a 40% markup on cost in order to cover your expenses and have a reasonable profit. So you could go through this whole mess to find that, or you could look at this and realize, okay, 40% markup on cost is equivalent to a 28.57% markup on selling price. So now I'm going to use that information $80 in here, and 100 is going to go here, which means this is now going to be 71.43. I can figure out how much I can afford to pay for that. 71.43 times 80 divided by 100. So that tells me I can afford to pay $57.14. Very good point. Now you can't find anywhere less than 60. Now you've got a decision to make. You can, well, you got a couple decisions to make. You can sell it for a little bit more. Yeah, sell it for like 82 or 83 to get your 40% on cost or 28.5% on selling price. Or you can not sell it because you're not going to be profitable. Or, and I'm not going to get too far into the business theory of it, but you can sell it at either breaking even or sell it at a slight loss because it gets people in your store. Yes. Because if there's a product that you know that people want, well, you're going to sell it even if you sell it at a slight loss because people are going to come to your store to get it. And they're buying something else that you market. Exactly. Hopefully they're buying something else that you'll make a profit off of. And stores don't often sell stuff at a loss, but they will quite often sell stuff at a break-even point. At some point they have to take a loss on it. Have you seen some of the clearance racks? There's no way they can get that stuff. Yeah, and that's one of the other things that we're going to talk about before we're done tonight is markdowns for clearance and stuff like that. Is at some point anything is better than nothing. A lot of the stuff that's on a clearance rack, they have written it off as a loss that they're not going to sell it at all. So anything they get, I mean, yeah, they've got shirts there that used to be $20 that they're selling for $2 or $3. They paid more than that for it, but they've written it off on their taxes as a total loss. And then whatever they get out of it is a bonus. There are, again, I don't want to get too far into the business practice of it, but this is actually kind of an interesting thing. Depending on the store, there's a couple of different ways things happen. If you're looking at a store, everybody assumes that what's in the store is owned by the store. That's not always the case. There are some places, and your small mom and pop stores, that's the way it is. What's in that store, they own. It's theirs. But there are some of your chains and some other spots where what's in that store is actually owned by the supplier until it's sold. At the point of sale, the store takes ownership of it and transfers ownership to the customer, to the buyer. So technically, up to that point, the supplier, the manufacturer, or the distributor owns that item. You guys are familiar with Rainbow Home Center in town here that went out of business. Everybody was expecting when they went out of business, they were going to sell their appliances for huge markdowns. No, they didn't. Awesome. I went to check them out. Well, they didn't sell. They didn't cut the prices on any of them. In fact, In the last, well, they didn't buy them back. GE owned them from the beginning. The Rainbow never owned those appliances. They were owned by the manufacturer. So they couldn't mark them down because they didn't own them.
The same principle, like, I know Blix, clothing store in the mall.
Yep.
If you've got a coupon, it most often does not work on things like North Face,
Yep.
the higher end brands, because
They're not
take
Blix.
them off.
Yes. And there are also some legal issues, not so much with clothing, but like groceries. Every now and then you'll see at Walmart, they have their price match guarantee. They will actually say, they've actually got it written now that the price match has to be within like a so many mile radius of that store.
And it has to be advertised.
Yeah, has to be advertised. So you cannot go out to the Twin Cities and get a flyer from a store in the Twin Cities and bring it to Walmart and Rice Lake and expect them to price match it. Partly because they can't legally do so in some cases. Different items have different expenses in different areas. So you might have a can of soup because the place where that is made and canned is really close to the Twin Cities. They can get it really cheap because there's very little shipping on it. Rice Lake has to pay more for it because it's got to be shipped further. Well, certain items, food is one of them, have a minimum markup. You are not allowed to sell food at a loss unless it meets certain conditions. One is close to expiration dates and stuff like that. But you are not allowed in most cases to sell food at a loss. You have a minimum markup. So Walmart and Rice Lake could not match the price from the store in Minnesota because that would put them below their minimum markup and they'd be in violation of federal law. So there's a lot of issues like that come into play too. But yeah, the whole retail industry is way more complicated than it looks. Okay, anyway, let's get back on track. Sorry, I got myself distracted. Let's look at it from the other side now. Let's say that we're going to convert a 40% markup on selling price to a percent markup on cost. So I've got my 40% markup, but now 100 goes selling price. So this is going to be 60. Up here, I was always choosing the cost to be $100. Right? Down here, I'm not going to. Can you tell me why? Because the cost is not 100%. I'm going to choose what to be $100? Selling price is going to be $100. So that means the dollar markup has to be 40 and the cost has to be 60. So now I'm going to replace this side again. If I'm converting it to a markup on cost, the 100% has to go with the cost. So I'm looking for this number. It's 100 times 40 divided by 60, which is going to be 66.67%. I'm going to show you now why I choose 100 to be whatever's the 100%. Because what it does, it allows me to not, the reason I showed you this is a little bit less confusing than what I'm about to show you. Because this one, it makes sense because you got dollars and you got percents. But the reason I always choose $100 to represent whatever's 100% is it allows me to use this table and just flat out, shorten the process and flat out cheat. So let's take a look. I'm going to convert 80% markup on cost to percent markup on selling price. I'm not going to label my columns this time. 80% markup on cost. Means 80% goes here, 100 goes with the cost. This is 180. If I chose my dollar amount, my $100 to equal the cost, right? That'd be the $100 on both sides. The numbers are going to go over here, just going to be these numbers, aren't they? So I'm not even going to bother writing them in. I'm just going to leave them over here and use them. On this side, if I'm changing this to a markup on selling price, where's the 100 going to go? On the selling price. Very good. And I'm looking for this amount. So I'm simply going to do 80 times 100 divided by 180, 44.44%. Questions? So basically what I'm doing is on one side, this is the percent on the cost. On the other side, this is the percent on the selling price. Notice, on this side, the 100% is with the cost. On this side, the 100% is with the selling price. So it allows me to put the table side by side. If that makes sense to you, great, use it. If not, go back to this. Any questions? Okay. Or too many to ask? You okay? Okay. Let's look at markdowns. There are a lot of cases where markdowns can happen. We were discussing earlier the whole idea of the store doesn't always own the merchandise they're trying to sell. So the manufacturer may actually come in and say, okay, we own this item, it's been sitting here too long, get it out of there. In most cases, the store doesn't own it, so rather than sending it back to the manufacturer because it's old or whatever, it's lost its value. The manufacturer isn't going to take it back and send it to a new supplier because it's out of date or whatever the issue is, whatever reason it's not selling anymore. So rather than spend the money to ship it back to the manufacturer, in fact, the manufacturer would have to pay that amount, they're just going to say, dump it, get rid of it. So the distributor or the manufacturer is going to write it off as a loss. And now the store can go ahead and sell it at a very, very reduced rate because basically they don't have to pay for it, or they're going to pay a very, very small amount for it. It's considered loss. That's what clearance really is. It's discontinued. The cost of that item is no longer playing into the price anymore. Now there's also sales and stuff like that and specials and whatever. But anyway, so let's say that we're going to have an item on the original price. Is $40. And they are going to sell it at a 30% discount. We want to find the discounted price. Now, we're going to always refer to this original amount. The original price is the list price. That is what it is listed as after they get their whatever desired markup. The discounted price, now here we could go ahead and simply find 30% and subtract it. But we know the original price is 100%. We're subtracting a 30% discount. What percent is the discounted price going to be? 70%. So all we really have to do is find 70% of that list price. Now this is something we're going to do quite regularly, so we're going to use the rate method. We're just going to take the $40 and multiply by 0.7, the complement of our discount. 0.70 if you want to do this for 70%. So that means that discounted price is going to be $28. So let's say we have a list price of $32, and there's going to be a 60% discount. Find the discounted price. That would be a pretty good deal. So what are we going to do here? It's going to be $32 times 0.4. Good. The complement of 60% is 40%, which is going to give us $12.80. Okay. The reason I'm doing it this way is it is not uncommon to go through several discounts before something is sold. For example, let's say we have an original list price of $80. This item now goes out of season. So you're going to have a 30% discount for going out of season. A couple months later, the manufacturer or distributor of that item decides to discontinue it. So they're going to add an additional 40% discount because it's discontinued. To find the final price, if I use that method I just showed you, it's not so bad to do. I'm just going to take my original price, my list price of $80. What do I do for the first discount? Times 70% or 0.7. What do I do for the second discount? 60% or 0.6. So now it's just going to be 80 times 0.7 times 0.6, which is going to give us what? $33.60. Any questions on that? So let's look at something, take it one step further. So we've got an item that has a list price of $150. And it sits on the shelf and it isn't selling because maybe it's a really ugly color or a really odd size or whatever. So the store was a 20% markdown. 20% markdown, 20% discount, same thing. Let's say it continues to sit there until it goes out of season. So they do an additional 30% markdown because it's now out of season. Occasionally things happen where things that were either out of style or out of season are all of a sudden in demand. For example, let's say somebody famous is seen in public wearing this type of an item, or they use it for something just outrageous. Now everybody has to have it. So let's say a celebrity is seen wearing that style of clothing or whatever it is. And now there is a 40% markup. They're increasing that price back up because now that they anticipate that it's going to sell now, people are going to really want it because of this event that happened. This markup, unless otherwise stated, is always assumed to be on whatever the price was at the time before that markup. And let's say now it continues to sit there and doesn't sell. And after a couple of months, they once again do a 40% markdown. Now I got a 40% markup followed by a 40% markdown. Can I just cancel them out? No. Because each of them is based off of whatever the price was right before it. And the price here is not the same as the price here. So those markdowns or markup and markdowns do not cancel out. But what we can do to make this simpler is use that rate method. We have our original price of $150. A 20% markdown means we're going to multiply it by 0.8, 80%. The complement of the 20% markdown. Now the 30% markdown means we're going to further multiply by 0.7, 70%. What do we do for the 40%? Careful. There it is. 1.40. Why 1.4? It's a markup. It's not 100 minus the percent. It's 100 plus the percent. These were marked down, so it was 100 minus the 30% to give us 70 or 0.7. So 100 plus 40% is 140 or 1.4. I'm going to pause. Everybody see where the 1.4 came from? Okay. Now then, we do have a 40% markdown. So times 0.6. So 150 times 0.8 times 0.7 times 1.4 times 0.6. Oops, there's a decimal point there. Come on. 1.4 times 0.6. Here we go. 70.56. Is that what you guys are getting? Okay. So have you guys try one of those. Items with a list price of $90. It's going to go through 30% markdown. Then it's going to go through 50% markup. Then another 30% markdown. And finally, 60% markdown. Find the final price after those markdowns and markups. So we start with the 90. What's the first thing we do to it? 0.7. This is a 30% markdown. So 100 minus 30 is 70. So times 0.7. And then 1.5. This is a 50% markup. So it's 100 plus 50%, or 150. So 1.5. And then 0.7, because it's 30% marked down, so 100 minus 30. And then 0.4. What do you get? $26 what? 46. $26.46. Any questions?
There's no way they made more than that.
No. At some point, usually what will happen is this initial markdown is usually initiated by the company, the manufacturer, or the distributor. And they will say, look, we don't want it back. We're going to, either the distributor owns it and they're going to say, okay, when you pay for it, we're going to cut what you pay us by this amount, so cut the price to get it off the shelf. Because the distributor wants to get something out of it before it goes out of style. Or the distributor has a deal with the retailer saying, if this does not sell, as long as you meet certain guidelines, like you have to keep it below a certain price and whatever. If this does not sell, we are going to reimburse you this amount. This is common in automotive. Well, in auto sales, usually the manufacturer owns the cars until they're sold. But in some cases, some lots, if they're not a certified dealer, they own the car, but the manufacturer will still say, if it does not sell in this period of time, we're going to reimburse you this amount. The same thing sometimes happens in other retail situations of, okay, if this shirt does not sell, this is a $20 shirt, if it doesn't sell in the first 4 months, we're going to reimburse you $5. So then you can reduce the price accordingly to try to sell it.
So, what about like outlet stores? Like when stuff moves out of style and then moves.
Outlet stores are almost always directly owned by the manufacturer. And so what an outlet store in many cases are, there are things that the manufacturer produced and did not even get to a retailer before they went out of style, or something happened, went out of season or whatever. Or they went to a retailer and have been returned, not for flaws, but for, like I said, out of season, out of style, overstock. And sometimes they just produced too many and they just couldn't get them out to retailers. In most cases, that's what it is. Yeah, it is stuff. The outlet stores are almost always directly owned by the manufacturer.
Because they're not near as marked down as what you see on the clearance rack at the original store.
No, they're not.
Showing a profit.
They are still getting a profit, yes. And like I said, most of the time it's stuff that has not been sent out to a store, because you cannot, it's very difficult to ship something to a store and then ship it back and still sell it at a reduced price and get anything out of it. Yeah, an outlet store is still in most cases making back the cost of production at least. And kind of a good example of this is a friend of mine used to do this all the time. What he would do is he would actually buy most of his stuff online. And the first thing he would do the day he got it, he would look it over, make sure it was something he wanted. And then he would call the place he bought it from, because they have the 30-day money back guarantee or whatever. He'd call the place and say, okay, I don't want it. I want to return it. Send me whatever return packaging I need. And, of course, they're always, well, okay, so sorry. Why are you returning it? And he'd always say, well, you know what? It's kind of cool, but it's not as nice as I wanted it to. It's just not worth that price to me. And so, of course, they would negotiate. Because to them, let's say you bought a DVD or whatever, a movie. Once you've opened it and looked at it, it's still under that return warranty. And even if you haven't opened it, it's been in your hands, it is no longer a new product. So you send it back to where you bought it from. They cannot turn around and resell it as new product. They have to, at the very least, inspect it, make sure there's no damage to it, and then repackage it. This is going to be an expense to them. They also have to pay the shipping to return it to themselves, to get it back to themselves. They've already paid the shipping to get it to you. So they're going to do whatever they can to a certain extent to get you to keep it, so that they don't have to go through that expense. Because even selling it at full price, they're not going to recover their money if they have to go through all that expense. So, for example, one of the items was, I think a CD box set that was like $80. So the first thing that came back is, well, we'll cut it basically in half. It was like $39.99 or whatever. And when he said no, they just kept going. And after about half an hour, I think he paid like $12 for it. But it was, okay, to them, $12 was something out of it. It was going to cost them almost the full $80 to take it back, repackage it, and resell it again. So they were recovering their expenses, is all they were doing. Okay, anybody need a break? You just want to pound through? This is going to be a good 20 minutes or so more, just so you know. Okay.
What are we just reviewing?
Nope, this is still new stuff. Yeah.
Are we reviewing the test?
We're going to try to review for the test if we can, but that'll come after this next section. But the last 4 weeks, yes. What we want to talk about yet is perishable goods. Perishable can either be food, where it actually could spoil or has to be sold within a certain amount of time. Can be clothing that goes out of season or whatever, you need to get it off the shelf. Anyway, what is a certain amount of it is expected not to sell. For example, let's say you are making donuts. I just totally forgot how to spell donuts. That's not right, is it? Is it? Okay. So let's say you're selling donuts. You expect to be able to sell a certain amount, but you're not going to produce exactly that amount because you don't want to run short. So you're going to produce more than what you expect to be able to sell in the period of time where they're going to stay fresh. Let's say you say that you have to sell them within 48 hours or you no longer consider them fresh. Well, you're not going to produce just enough to get you through that 48 hours because you don't want to run out. Because you might sell more. You might sell more than what you're expecting. So let's say these donuts you're going to produce at a cost of 15 cents each to produce. You're going to produce 50 of them. You expect 10% not to sell. So that's saying is you produce 10% more than what you expected to sell because you wanted to have a little extra. You figure to cover your costs, your overhead, your labor, and all that, you need an 80% markup on cost. Find your desired selling price. What are you going to have to sell these for? Okay. There's going to be a couple of steps added to this process. Step one is a new step. You defined the total cost. All the problems we've done so far, you've just been told the cost is this amount. Well, here, how do we find the total cost? 50 items times 15 cents each, which is going to give us $7.50. Correct? Perfect. Now that we have the total cost, step two is one that's going to be familiar with us. Mark it up to find total selling price. This is just our table. So we know our cost is $7.50. Our markup, we said, had to be 80% markup on cost. So 80% goes there, and of course it's on cost, so 100% goes there. Which means this is 180%. And we are looking for the total selling price. So that's going to be this number right here. So we're going to do 180 times 750 divided by 100, which is going to give us what? $14.50 or $13.50? $13.50. That is our total selling price. We need to get $13.50 out of these donuts to make our markup. So this is something we've already done. This is the old stuff that we did the first hour and a half of class. Step 3 is a new step. Figure out how many you're actually going to sell. You had 50 of them, right? You're expecting 10% not to sell, right? Which means what percent actually do sell? 90% sell. So we're going to take our 50 items times 0.9. Or you could find 90% of 50, however you're going to do it. I'm doing it the shortest way possible right now. So 50 times 0.9 is 45 will sell. Step 4. Find the unit selling price. In other words, that's the selling price per unit. How do we find the unit selling price? We take the total selling price divided by the number we expect to sell. So that's going to be the $13.50 divided by 45, which is going to give us how much? 30 cents. So we sell those donuts for 30 cents each in order to recover our expected, our costs and our expected markup or desired markup. Now again, we may sell more than 45 and come out better than we expect. We may sell less than 45, but this is based on our best predictions due to past experience. Any questions? Okay, so then let's look at you're going to produce 800 cookies at a cost of 8 cents each. Expect 20% not to sell. So either they're going to sit there too long and dry out, or you might eat a few. Who knows, right? If I were cooking, it would be way more than 20% that don't sell. Now let's say you figure you need 40% markup on cost. So let's find our unit selling price. How much are we going to charge per cookie? That's it. So what's my first step? You got it. Total cost. So 800 times 0.08, which is $64 or $6.40? $6.40. Okay. So $6.40. Sure. Yeah. Okay. It is $64. So the total cost is $64. What's step 2? Mark it up. In other words, find total selling price. What's going to go in here? Where's the 64 go? Dollar cost. What else do we have? %40 goes for the markup, percent markup. And 100 goes cost. So 140 goes for the selling price. Cross multiply and divide, we get what? Wait, 99.60 or something like that? No. 89.60. So our total selling price is $89.60. What's step 3? Find out how many are sold. How many do we produce? 800. What percentage do we expect to not sell? 20% not sell. So what percent do we expect to sell? 80% do sell. So what are we going to do to the 800? Times the 0.8 for 80%. So we're expecting 640 to be sold. Then what? Step 4. Unit selling price, which is found by $89.60 divided by 640. 14 cents each. What do you think? Not so bad? Let's say you purchase 100 shirts at a cost of $4 each. You expect 20% to go out of season. Before being sold. You must have 120% markup on cost. There's an extra I'm going to throw this in here. You will sell out of season items on clearance for $3 each. So there's an extra step or so involved in this one. Step 1 is still the same, which is total cost. And that will be the 100, as you said, times $4, so it'll be $400. Step 2 hasn't changed. What's step 2? Mark up to find the total selling price. What goes in our table? $400 cost. What else? Cost is on, markup is on cost, so 100% goes in for the cost. And 120% markup on 120% markup, so 120% goes in for the markup. Which means the selling price is $220. So looking for that amount, 220 times 400 divided by 100 is $880. That's what we need. How are we doing so far? Step 3 is mostly the same. Remember, step 3 was to find the number sold. We're going to add to it number not sold as well. So we had how many shirts? 100. What percent did it say not sold? 20%. So that means 80% are sold. So 100 times 0.2 is 20 that are not sold. 100 times 0.8 is 80 that are sold. Why do we now all of a sudden care about the 20 that are not sold? Yeah, they're going on the clearance rack, $3 each. And we are assuming that we will get $3 each. Most of the time, like I said, that clearance rack is either the items have been bought back, so it's not even the store's items anymore, so they're getting whatever they can out of them. Or in some cases, they've written them off as a loss. So that $3 in this calculation, they're going to get $3 for it, period. Either they're going to sell it for $3 or they're gaining $3 on their taxes by writing it off. So each of those items is going to get $3. So we're adding in a step here. I'm going to call it step 3B. Which is the recovered dollar amount. And that is our number not sold, 20 times that recovered amount, that clearance amount, which is $3 each, which is going to give us $60 recovered. Which means at the beginning of step 4, which I'm going to call step 4A, we are adding a step. Which means I have to find the dollar amount needed from the ones that sold. I found a total selling price up here of $880. Up to this point, that's what we've been using for our total selling price for all our other examples. But here we're actually getting some money back from the ones that go out of season. We're recovering, we're going to subtract the recovered amount. So we're recovering $60. So we're going to take our $880 that we need to get out of that amount of shirts, and we're going to subtract that $60 that's recovered. So in reality, we only need to get 820 out of the ones that do sell. So now step 4, find the unit selling price. It's simply the $820 divided by the 80 that are going to sell. So we have to sell them for $10.25. Now I could complicate this further and say, okay, our initial price is going to be higher because we're going to assume that we're going to sell half of them at a higher rate, then mark them down 20% and sell another half of them at a lower rate. I don't hate you guys that much, so we're not going to do that in here right now. This is as far as we're going to take it. But let's do one more example with that recovered cost. Let's say you're going to produce 80 loaves of bread. At a cost of 40 cents each. You expect 15% not to sell. Unsold items will be sold for 25 cents each. So either they'll be sold off at like a day old, or people buy them for bear bait and other purposes. You need 60% markup on cost. So find how much you should charge for each of the loaves of bread. I'm going to pause this and let you guys try that. So, total cost. What do we get? 80 times 40 cents is going to give us $32, right? Then what? Mark it up. So, we have $32 here, 60%, 100%, 160. What are we going to get here? $51.20. Very good. And then number sold and not sold. So we have 80. What percent is not sold? 15%, which means what percent is sold? 85%. So 15% comes out to be 12. 85% is 68, correct? Then what? Recovered dollars. So 12 times 25 cents each is $3. Then our $51.20, subtract the $3 recovered, so $48.20 is what we need to get for our total. And then $48.20 divided by the 68 sold, which gives us, what's that? 0.71, so 71 cents. How many of you got that? Cool. It's not as bad as it really looks, is it? Okay, I am going to end that recording right there.